Hey, listeners, welcome back to Finding Your Force, Breaking Chains and Igniting Flames. So, today we're doing a Mambo Muni drop. Um, I know in our launch, Mambo, you were talking about how one of your areas of expertise is kind of the medical mystery, right? The things that no one else can seem to figure out, and some of your clients come to you for support and healing on this. I'd love to hear more about that. Are there ties that you found? Like, is there a particular cultural impact? Is there an ancestral impact? Is there, just tell us about this because I'm fairly curious myself. So I'm excited
hmm
to hear.
Yeah, and I feel like this kind of theme unravels as I continue practicing. It just keeps unraveling what it actually means. But for now, when I think about like a medical mystery, and if you look it up online, whatever, I don't know what you're going to find. But when I think of a medical mystery specific to our culture, we live in the Western world. I think about a few levels of it. So one is like literally something that a Western doctor can't figure out a treatment for. So it's a mystery to them. So a medical mystery, right, at kind of like a low level, I'm going to say, is kind of like, okay, so the diagnosis I dealt with, for example, was fibromyalgia, right? We have a name for it, we have diagnostics for it in the Western world, right? And there's not really treatment for it. There's not real treatment yet, right? That can be like, hey, we can cure it. So in my mind, fibromyalgia, even though you've classified it as something, you've been able to find root causes, test trigger points, you don't have a treatment for it that's effective. And so it remains a bit of a medical mystery. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think what you're saying is we've got criteria to say this is what it is, but we don't have a cure. We have maybe a how to try to manage it, right? But it's not going away. And
Yep.
that's what I think of when I think of a cure. Like it's gone. That's it. The
hmm
end.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like one level. But then the other way I look at it, which I think is going to be closer to what most people think of immediately when I say medical mysteries, it's like really like there's another layer of medical mystery that's like, what the fuck is this? Right? It's like legit a mystery. So somebody is um having their white blood cell count go up and down like spontaneously, and these are stories I've heard. And doctors do tests, they're like, we have no idea what's going on. They run all the possible tests, and it's like that level of like, what the fuck is this, right? We've heard stories too, somebody inflames and inflames and inflames with fluids, but there's no diagnosis, no blood work, nothing that is like showing why.
Like, is that those scenarios where they're kind of excluding things versus identifying things? Or like, well, it's not this, but we still don't know what it is, and it's not
Mhm.
this. So it's kind of that journey of, well, thank you for telling me everything I don't have. But that's not helpful for me in the moment.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think even that can range a lot. So I think, there's a lot of exclusionary thing that goes on. So the whole, realm of Western medicine that's like, okay, rule out this, rule out this, rule out this. And then the cluster of Western medicine will find like, okay, we can't like say this isn't it yet. This is a possibility, but this is also a possibility. So it can be exclusion, but also there can be some like, it could be this, it could be that, but essentially there's a level of what the fuck is it that that is what's going on. So it's not like what I said before where it's like, okay, we know what this is, we've put a name to it. Is it that really? Do you know what I mean?
I
But
do, I
we don't
do.
have a
Okay, so
treatment.
it's like check the
Or is
box.
it like,
Yes,
I
no,
can't
maybe
even put a
so.
fucking name and connection to this. I might have ideas, I might have zero ideas, but overall it's like I have no idea how this is happening and why.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So medical mysteries. And culturally speaking, there's so much I could say about different examples, but I can give you one that really illustrates that first layer that I mentioned of like, we can put a label on this, but it's a mystery to us what to do with it. And I remember I've had this luck of having really good Western doctors when I do see them. And I remember the first time I had a fibromyalgia diagnosis given to me, which, side note, thanks to some different avenues of holistic healing and predominantly my initial work with Papa Hector, as a client healing in my own journey, I don't have it anymore. Like I actually don't have the diagnosis
That's
anymore.
amazing.
It's cured. There's some
Hmm.
limitations I have, that kind of lasted, like I'm not someone that can run. I don't
Okay.
run anymore, and I'm like, I don't like to run.
You're like, look, I got some steps in. No one needs to know what the speed was. It
I
happened.
don't like running. I will dance. I will dance. Like I will like shamelessly 80s dance for my heart rate to go up, but I don't get me running, okay? So I don't care. But anyhow, it was healed. But when I first got that diagnosis, which they do through a series of like listing your symptoms. This was back in 2011, something like that. Notate your symptoms, and then they push on specific pressure points. I don't remember what else it entailed, but then the diagnosis is given, and it's the closest thing that at that time could match what I was dealing with. I'm like, right? But I love that this doctor, right, Western doctor, primary medicine provider, and this was when I was living in Colorado, she basically was like, I'm going to be honest with you. She was like, I can give you X, Y, and Z medications to help with some of the symptoms of the pain, and these medications have a lot of side effects. And she was like, but we Westerners don't actually know what to do with this. I was blown away by this doctor. And she was like, whereas she was like, what I know so far is traditional Chinese medicine, for example, you know, they look at fibromyalgia in a cluster of like sleep disorders. And when I looked further into it, I think it was like sleep disorders where you particularly can leave your body in your sleep. And
So like
essentially the
astral
process,
travel?
some maybe, and
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't have the level of containment of astral travel. Sometimes it's leave your body and you're like in trauma limbo land and you don't have control
Ooh.
over it.
Yeah.
So, but essentially that's like one way they looked at it, not the only way. And she told me this, and that they've been treating it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years
Mm.
beyond us, right? Just totally honest like that,
I love that.
right? And so that to me is like one of those examples of like that level medical mystery. And to be
Yeah.
able to acknowledge like something's a mystery to the Western world, then can gave me permission, and I think can give people permission, right, to then be like, okay, what other avenues do we have that haven't become popularized, normalized, accepted,
Hmm.
whatever it is, in the West, and get help from there, which I did. I was like relentless. I was like, I'm not going to be, I don't remember how old I was then, maybe early 20s, mid 20s. I'm not going to be dealing with feeling like a 95-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to do what it takes to
Yeah.
figure this out. And so, for me, it was finding a conjunction of acupuncture, a holistic nurse, and predominantly the spiritual work,
Right.
taught by Papa Hector, that helped clean this up for me. So that I think is such a good example of that level of medical mystery where it's like we have a name for it. We can validate that you're dealing with something. At least you could do that. So I'm not labeled a psychosomatic person, which
Right.
has
Right.
like a
Right.
stigma to it. At least you
Yeah.
can give me something. And I think a lot of people look for that in the West. And then you don't have a treatment for it though. So that was so awakening for me of like, to have a doctor that was like humble, and willing to name that was pivotal in me understanding medical mysteries at that level.
Hmm.
So I can give you another personal example. I love this one. I think you'll love this one that talks about the kind of what the fuck is this level of a medical mystery. And I remember from when I was really young, I would be dealing with these stabbing pains in my abdomen and my
Hmm.
hips. Like, and when I say stabbing, I mean it felt like somebody had put a knife into my hip and I would suddenly scream out loud, or at least like grunt out loud
Yeah.
from the pain. And then it would subside. So much so that I got x-rays, all this kind of stuff, right? I had like my siblings, were young then, and so they would make fun of me and be like,
Hmm.
and they would joke and be like, oh, Moody's sudden crotch pains. They would call
Oh
them like
no.
my like
Yeah.
sudden crotch pains, right? And they would laugh. I don't blame them because I had no,
Yeah.
example of what was going on. And, that's what young siblings did at that time. We'd just laugh a lot, make fun of each other. But I went to the doctor, nothing. So I have these, and it doesn't happen often, but it happens. And I have these spontaneously going on through most of my life, right? On and off. Not frequent enough, luckily, where it was like that level of suffering, but it was definitely like a what the fuck to me and to
Hmm.
doctors. And I remember one of my first ceremonies with Papa Hector guiding it. There was all sorts of healing I needed to do, different extractions, removals. I won't get into all of it, but to resolve the fibromyalgia and some other life issues I was dealing with. And I had never mentioned once about these hip pains that I was having, these stabbing pains. It wasn't in the front of my mind out of my layers of problems I was dealing with
Right,
at the
right.
time. And so when I went into a ceremony, right, there's all sorts of healing work being done. I'm new to all of it. I'm just like taking it in. I don't know what's going on with but I'm feeling things being cleared off of me. And within this major working, right? So it's this 3 hour thing, and this little blurb of it. What happens is um one of the spirits comes through and is like, hey, so you have these stabbing pains. And then I'm like, oh, and again, never mentioned it to anyone there. And they're like, um it's the spirit of your uncle who was killed during the
Mhm.
Bangladesh-Pakistan War. So my dad's older sibling was a freedom fighter, in during that war, and it was known that he was captured and tortured for a
Mm.
questionable amount of time. People don't know, and then eventually, killed. And so I wasn't born then, nothing like that, right? A very long time ago. He was young, and essentially the spirit's like, it's the spirit of that uncle. And they were like, and he was stabbed multiple times, and then they illustrated some other things, like he had limbs cut, it was pretty gruesome. And they put that in that ceremony, just like, side note, in that ceremony they put this relative to rest, essentially, right? And the spirit was hanging out with me. And after that I never had the pains anymore, you know and I'm like, that's like a real good example of a medical mystery, right? And so I gave a personal example. Client examples can be very kind of specific and can disclose a lot about a person, I think. um but they're the types of clients that started coming my way once I became a mambo. People dealing with these, like, what the fuck, or and or a combination, an autoimmune issue, something along those lines that Western doctors did diagnose.
That's, hey, thank you for sharing that. Um, that's a really intense experience, and I definitely know some people that deal with autoimmune diseases as categorized, right? And some are lighter level, others almost, fully debilitated. And I think between that aspect of we know what to call it, but we can't heal it, and what you were talking about earlier of, getting permission in a way from whoever your doctor is to explore other avenues, I think that was really impactful for me to hear, because I think a lot of people don't feel empowered to search other avenues or less like acceptable pathways, like a particular Western medicine doctor, right? To
Mhm.
explore those other aspects of cultures, traditions, and healing that maybe where we live currently, you and I at least in the Western world, it's foreign, right? And
Mhm.
so it's not talked about, or it's not even referenced of like, I think someone over here who's from this culture or practices this tradition, they deal with this in a different way. So I think that's really eye-opening. And I think you tapped on something really, really powerful, which is the permission aspect. I think
Mhm.
that's something that's really valuable for our listeners to hear, because I feel like what you're saying is, for you, you got that permission in essence from your doctor. But some of our listeners might be suffering here, and their
Mhm.
doctors are not that transparent or open, right, in saying that. So what would you say to listeners of this? Because I think based on what you're saying, it could be ancestral trauma, it
Mhm.
could be something within themselves that needs healing. There's a lot of different things that
Mhm.
could be impacting their physical well-being.
Yeah, 100%. And just like what you said, right? What I would say to our listeners is, going back to like one of the root things that we're about here on Finding Your Force, your spirit, like who you really are, what you're made of, is 100,000% unique, cannot be replicated. And with that being said, when you think about it, everything you're dealing with in your life to some level will be a medical mystery. life is a fucking medical mystery.
I love that. You're so
Like,
right.
because life is comprised of all these aspects of us: mind, body, spirit, emotion. Body isn't the only thing when we're talking about medical mysteries, and we actually even know that in the Western world. Why do we think we have a statistic out there that's like 80% of illnesses are caused by stress, right? We can't
Mhm.
technically measure stress, right? When I
Yeah.
mean that word and how we mean it. So everything's like a mystery. You are a mystery to yourself, right? Unlocking who you are after you've been through your life of, trauma, conditioning, people preaching at you, whatever it is that got you off kilter with yourself. You're a mystery to yourself. And that's why there are like people who exist to help you discover who you are. But with all that being said, the uniqueness of who you are and culture becomes a huge aspect of that, right?
Mhm.
That we're talking about how medical mysteries are really going to also define in different ways in different cultures. So imagine how unique you are. And with that being said, everything you're dealing with can be looked at all those levels of like who you are, and then unique to your story. Like, somebody else might have the same exact stabbing pains in their gut that I'm describing physiologically, right? You might be having those. And yours might actually be because you're dealing with an hormonal imbalance that's causing inflammation
Mhm.
in your pelvis. And that's it,
Right. Right.
right? And so just remember how unique you are. And, even though, like you said, I had some good luck with practitioners, I didn't get into the trash stories. I've had some really bad
Oh, girl,
ones
we
too.
can trade trash stories all day
Like
long.
trash
I have very strong
stories,
feelings about this.
right? And like and trash stories, I mean, not just medical, but therapists at the psychology level, right? False spiritual guides in my life, these
Hmm.
kinds of things, right? So I've had my fair share of trash too. And a lot of my clients who I work with have really horrendous medical stories, like, malpractice, things like that. And so there's a whole span, just like any other field, in the medical realm
Hmm.
of error. I'm going to
Yeah.
say kindly. And so you always have to be your own advocate. You
Yeah.
always have to be your own advocate. That's part of what empowerment is about, what being a badass is about, what igniting your inner flame is about, is like you always have to be your own advocate. You might have people you love and trust with everything that might give you advice about something in your life from nothing but a
Hmm.
place of love, but it's not true for you,
Yeah.
you know? So that's what I would say, is that hopefully some of what we touched in on, about medical mysteries on this podcast opens that up for, all of you, our listeners out there, is like, what would it mean? What does it mean to you to be your own best advocate and to have faith that you have your spirit and guides, your spirits by your side to help you do that. So yeah, that's what I got. I'm really passionate about this space, as you can tell now from some
Yeah.
of
That
my
was some
own
powerful stuff right there. It really was.
my own wondrous life stories of medical mysteries.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, our life stories are what prepare us to help others with theirs. So I think that thank you again for sharing, and sharing of yourself for us all to learn a little bit more about you and how these things have brought you to the path that you're on, the healings that you're able to help facilitate for others, and for really empowering our listeners to be their own advocate, to find that piece of force in themselves that, you are unique. And so if, as many people in the world have said, but rarely does anyone listen, if something doesn't feel right, it might not be right. So don't let someone tell you
1000%.
it is. Trust your voice. I can't wait to hear some of your next podcasts. Listeners, thank you for joining us. Mambo Muni, thank you for this amazing session today. Remember, y'all, we glow, we burn brighter together. So until next time, stay lit.
Thanks.